By the Eternal One, the guardian of Israel, I probe my father's mood at this time tomorrow or on the third day, and if his response is favorable, I will send a message to you at once and disclose it to you. But if my father intends to do you harm, may the Almighty do thus to Yonatan, and more, if I do not disclose it to you and send you off to escape unharmed. May the Almighty be with you, as the Almighty was formerly with my father. Nor shall you fail to show me the Almighty's faithfulness while I am alive. Episode 5. Shaul versus David. Act 1.
Hurry. Yes. Listen. Listen.
In the last episode of the Kings of Israel, we witnessed the secret anointing of David and the victory over the Philistines in the wake of the fall of the insolent Goliath. Immediately afterwards, relates the first book of Shmuel, the heart of Yonatan, the son of Shaul, was bound in love and friendship to David. Yonatan's deep friendship for David should not surprise us, because as related in episode 1 of the Kings of Israel podcast, Yonatan himself bravely ascended with nothing other than his faith and sword, and no one other than his arms bearer supporting him, to battle the Philistines, who had attacked and subjugated the Jewish people. Now, Yonatan, the son of the king, has seen the young David's bravery against Goliath, and his heart immediately connects to David. It is the kind of love in which one soul sees its own qualities in another person. As King Shlomo would later point out in Mishlei, Proverbs, Ish lefi mehalelo, we can understand who we are by whom we praise. In this case, it is easy to see who Yonatan was from his response to the bravery and deep faith in the Almighty of David. Yonatan takes off his own armor and gives it to David, as well as his own sword and shield. And King Shaul sends word to David's father Yishai that from now on, David's place is in King Shaul's service. On his way back from the battle against Goliath in the Elah Valley, David passes through the towns on the way to Givat Shaul, and the women of the town come forth in greeting, composing songs and poems with drums to herald the victorious king. Yet gossiping women relate that it was said on those occasions that Shaul killed thousands of the enemies of the Almighty and of Israel, but David killed tens of thousands. This was not said in Shaul's presence, because that would be highly disrespectful to the king. But word reaches Shaul, and he remembers Shmuel's prophecy that he would be replaced as king over Israel by a better man. And this suspicion ignites Shaul's jealousy towards David, and this very jealousy causes the divine presence to further depart from Shaul, replaced by the inevitable evil spirit that further compounds Shaul's jealousy and bitterness. Here, we need to remember that in a certain sense, Shaul is not at fault. The Almighty, for his own reasons, has set up an extremely difficult position for Shaul, for David, and by extension for Shaul's son Yonatan as well, as David's bosom friend, because David has been anointed king in secret by the prophet Shmuel, effectively signaling the transfer of the divine favor from Shaul to David. Of course, Shaul has been warned twice on two separate occasions by the prophet Shmuel that the Almighty will replace him as king. Yet Shmuel's warning does not spell Shaul's immediate physical downfall, for Shaul still reigns on the throne of Israel. He is a king as far as he himself is concerned, who feels threatened in his kingship. And the penalty for rebellion against the king is death. For this is a rebellion against the Almighty himself, the one who appointed the king of Israel, through his divinely appointed prophet Shmuel. Shaul certainly perceives, and indeed his perception is accurate, that David could indeed be that better man whom the prophet has heralded. But that does not matter, whether a better man or not. For anyone to challenge the king is punishable by death as rebellion under the laws of Israel. And so Shaul once again is put in a very difficult position by the Almighty, if not an impossible one. As far as he knows, he is doing the right thing. Yet perhaps there is an element once again of improvisation on Shaul's part. And of course, we hesitate to mention that, because who are we to understand the greatness of that king, that first king of Israel? But it is incumbent upon us to inquire. It could be that there is an element of impermissible improvisation. Instead of inquiring of the prophet as to the matter of David, or inquiring of the Sanhedrin as to whether the status of a rebel applies to David, Shaul takes matters into his own hands. Shaul will try whatever he can to ensure that this young upstart will not supplant him as the king over Israel. If this seems like a strange development for a man of deep faith like Shaul, it may be pleaded on his behalf that he believes that the acclamation of the people of Israel is the main factor in who becomes king over Israel. Shaul sees David's popularity, and at first, he feels that David's popularity can be diminished. So Shaul demotes David to a relatively low-level position as a minor officer in the army, an officer of thousands, Sar Alafim. He hopes that this demotion will lower the profile of this potential rival. But with divine help, the very opposite occurs. David is successful in battling the Philistines even as a low-level officer. Shaul sees that the Almighty is with David and gives him success in seemingly low-level, unglamorous tasks, as in the greater tasks. Shaul determines that he must eliminate this young upstart, who apparently is an emerging rival for Shaul's kingship, and that he must do so, he must eliminate him in a different way. As we related previously, David would play music for Shaul to ease the evil spirit that had descended upon him when the divine spirit departed somewhat from him. Shaul determines that he will throw his spear towards the wall and accidentally, quote unquote, hit David while David is concentrating on the harp he is playing for Shaul. The killing will be viewed as a tragic accident. And so Shaul attempts the act, but each time the divine presence was with David, and he looked up from the harp just in time to prevent Shaul from executing his plan. Once again, Shaul sees that the Almighty has sent his divine help to this young man. Shaul is in a bind. Prior to the battle with Goliath, Shaul is increasing desperation to find a champion to fight the giant Philistine, and had promised both great wealth and his daughter's hand in marriage to the warrior who would defeat Goliath. And that warrior was none other than David. So Shaul determines to deal strategically with David. He gives him his eldest daughter, Meirav, in marriage, who, according to some accounts, had already been betrothed to a nobleman named Adriel, in the hopes of causing David to fall to a low spiritual level and therefore be vulnerable to mortal combat at the hands of the Philistines. Moreover, as the required pledge of marriage, David forgives Shaul's debt to him. He is no longer to be the recipient of Shaul's wealth that he earned as a prize by defeating Goliath. Yet this plot too fails, for Meirav dies, and instead Shaul tells David that he will receive the hand of Michal, Shaul's youngest daughter, in marriage. But Shaul makes this new betrothal to his daughter Michal contingent on a seemingly reckless and foolhardy act of vengeance against the Philistines. "Bring me," says Shaul, "the foreskins of 100 Philistines." This, Shaul thinks, will provoke a violent reaction on the part of the Plishtim because the act will humiliate them, and by humiliating them, enrage the Philistines and cause them to rise up against and kill David. David does not object. but instead consents, and against all the odds, David succeeds in this reckless mission. He joins battle once again against the Philistines, and against all odds, he brings Shaul not the required 100, but 200 Plishti foreskins, emerging victorious once more. David's battle strategy and tactics are not what might be expected of a regular warrior in the Bronze Age. We saw David in his epic showdown with the Plishti giant Goliath, making use primarily not of force of conventional laws, but rather the much more powerful ability to channel divine energy into his sling attack. At that time, as related in the last episode, David invoked the honor of the Almighty as the main force that would grant him victory. The battle against Goliath was not an aberration in David's life. But David's method of battle goes far beyond even that level of faith. In each episode, we bring you some of the Dvash Tachas Halashon, the honey under the tongue, or deeper spiritual meaning underlying the history. The sages relate in the Zohar, Parshas Miketz, that David was very careful in his fulfillment of the mitzvahs, the divine commandments, and purified himself with complete purity, not only in actually performing the commandments and refraining from transgressing the negative commandments, but also in working on what the Ramchal in the Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the upright, quoting the Tana Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, calls the quality of Nikias, or inward purity. The idea of Nikias is to purify the inner thoughts, to seek out only to cleave to the divine will, and not to cleave to anything else. And because David purifies himself in this way before battle, he goes into battle with a strong trust in the Almighty. He is careful not to sin, so that those sins should not rise up against him in his hour of need. He is careful that nothing should separate between him and the Almighty. And so David himself relates in the Tehillim, the Psalms, chapter 18, that he requested total victory against his enemies. Let me pursue my enemies, he asked to the Almighty, and I shall overtake them. I will not return until I have destroyed them. David did so because, as it says in the same chapter, the Almighty rewarded me according to the purity of my hands in his sight. And therefore he could tell the Almighty, with you, O God, I will run against a large horde, and with my Creator I will leap over a wall. All of this because, as he says a few chapters later in the Psalms, who shall be worthy to go up to the mountain of the Almighty, and who can merit to stand in the Almighty's holy place? One who is pure of hands and pure of heart. It was this cleaving to the Almighty, David knew, that gave him his prowess in battle against seemingly impossible, overwhelming odds in the eyes of a world focused on the physical or material rather than the higher spiritual reality. The internal battle to maintain purity of heart in the service of the divine was a far greater battle than facing mortal foes in physical battles. David excelled at the more difficult form of battle and thus prevailed in the lesser form of battle as well. Meanwhile, as Shaul increasingly puts David in harm's way, Yonatan, the son of Shaul, understands the danger his friend David is in, and Yonatan resolves to do what he can to diffuse his father's enmity, his hatred for David, with whom he has a soul connection. He engages his father in conversation and listens sympathetically to his father's ire. But then he offers Shaul a different perspective. David's main fault, he tells his father, which is his tendency to put himself in harm's way as a warrior, is actually to Shaul's advantage, because David has only used his reckless bravery in the king's service against the Philistines. If David is flawed, it is a flaw that is dangerous only to himself. But, says Yonatan, who himself is reckless in his own bravery, this trait of character is only useful. Let not my father, he tells Shaul, spill innocent blood. David's recklessness itself puts him in harm's way, and if he is going to be killed, it will be through his own recklessness, and there is no need to commit a sin by deliberately killing him. Despite knowing the friendship between Yonatan and David, Shaul considers and accepts Yonatan's position, and he swears that he will not harm David. He returns to treating David as a valued servant in war and in playing music to ease Shaul's spirit at times of relaxation. Yet this period of relative harmony and peace between the two great men does not last long. As David continues to succeed in battle against the Philistines, defeating and routing them in confrontation after confrontation, the same evil spirit once again descends upon Shaul's heart and mind. Shaul witnesses David's success even when the Plishtim seek him out to take revenge upon him for the taking of the foreskins. But rather than hide from them, David faces the Plishtim in battle and emerges victorious. The victory is improbable, for the forces were seemingly unevenly matched. So Shaul realizes again that the presence of the divine rests on David, and once again, the bitter spirit takes over Shaul's mind and heart. Once again, David plays music for him to assuage his bitter spirits. Shaul is holding his spear during the performance. When David looks up from his instrument, he sees to his horror that Shaul has raised his spear to throw at him, and Shaul lets fly. Now, Shaul is not hiding his desire to kill the young man, but David evades the throw again, and once again the spear lodges harmlessly in the wall behind him. Yet this time, David flees from Shaul, and he hides, eventually making his way back to his wife Michal, the daughter of Shaul. But even there, he will not long be left in peace. Shaul sends his men to find and arrest David. Michal sees the armed men coming, and she helps David to escape just in time from the second-floor window in the back of their house. David flees and makes his way as quickly as possible to Nayot in Ramah, to the dwelling place of the prophet Shmuel, who had anointed him king in secret. Meanwhile, back at home, Michal meets Shaul's men at the door and tells them that David is ill and bedridden. To emphasize this point, she allows the men to see into the bedroom for themselves. There lies an ill David, apparently asleep in his sickbed. How can that be? It was Michal's subterfuge to save her husband's life. She had placed one of the teraphim of David. According to some sources, this is an image of David for his wife to remember him while he is gone, in the bed along with a sheepskin to simulate the form of a man. Shaul's men are taken in by the ruse and return to Shaul with the report of David's sickness. And Shaul sends them right back again. Prop David up, he tells them, and see if he is really sick, and bring him to me. When they return, they discover the ruse. Shaul is irate. He confronts his daughter Michal, angrily asking her why she perpetrated this ruse, allowing David precious time to flee the house and avoid his men. He threatened to kill me, Michal tells her father, if I did not assist him. Michal, too, recognizes her father's anger and envy of David for the error that it is. It is noteworthy that at least 2 of Shaul's own children love David and seek to preserve his life, even against their own father's wishes. Meanwhile, Shaul has learned of David's whereabouts. David has escaped capture and gone up to the prophet Shmuel in Ramah. And so Shaul sends his men to pursue David to arrest him and bring him back to be executed by Shaul. But even before they arrive, a small part of the spirit of prophecy that is upon Shmuel comes to rest upon Shaul's men, and instead of pursuing David, they begin to prophesy. So Shaul sends a second set of his men. He hopes they will carry out his orders to arrest David better than the first contingent had. But the same thing happens, and these men too are stricken with prophecy and rendered useless for the purpose of arresting David. So Shaul sends yet a third set of his men with no better result. So finally, in the hope that a king will succeed, where the king's servants have failed miserably, Shaul himself journeys to Nayot in Ramah to apprehend David himself. This effort meets some success. Indeed, Shaul manages to approach far closer than his servants had, reaching as far as the presence of the prophet Shmuel himself. But there, the spirit of prophecy descends upon Shaul as well. But he is stricken with an even more intense spirit of prophecy, Unlike the men Shaul sends, prophecy transfers to Shaul from Shmuel directly and rests upon him the entire day. And in that exalted state, Shaul even removes his kingly garments, standing only to prophesy, and then falling at Shmuel's feet. Despite his power, as far as he knows, as the king of Israel, Shaul is powerless to apprehend and certainly not to harm David, for the Almighty is with David at this perilous moment as well. While Shaul is in a state of prophecy most of the day, David uses the opportunity to escape yet again from Shaul. It is likely now that David composes one of the most famous of his psalms, Psalm number 23, a psalm of David. The Almighty is my shepherd, I shall want for nothing. He makes me lie down in pleasant green pastures. He leads me beside the peaceful waters. Again and again he restores my soul. He desires to lead me in the paths of justice for his name's sake. Yet though I walk in the valley overshadowed by death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my oppressors. Once you anointed my head with oil. My cup has been full ever since. Only goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and then I return into the house of the Almighty forever. This psalm reveals another side of David which we have not yet spoken about, the divinely inspired poet. David has composed nothing less than a meditation on the divine presence, accompanying him throughout his many travails. Where most people would be rattled and even shattered by the pursuit of an implacable foe constantly seeking to end his life and his implacable hatred, David, by contrast, focuses on the constant divine presence in his life and the many blessings he has been given by the Almighty. He is seemingly alone, yet the most important presence, that of the divine force that created and maintains the world, is with him throughout. And this is the crucial comfort that prevents him from falling and allows him to maintain a sense of deeply felt joy. His composition of psalms occurs during all periods of his life, and the depth and beauty of those compositions has inspired cultures all over the world in many translations from the original ancient Hebrew. It is for that reason that, among other appellations that David has earned over the ages from the Torah scholars, is the title of Sweet Singer or Poet of Israel. We will provide some of these compositions in connection with the events that inspired them in future episodes of the Kings of Israel as well. Returning to our tale, after David escapes from Shaul, Yonatan seeks him out, and David pours out his heart to his close friend. Why, he asked Yonatan, does your father hate me? What have I done to him that he wishes to kill me? Yonatan protests that this is not so. His father, he tells David, does not wish him dead, merely to take him into protective custody. But David is having none of this. After all, he himself saw Shaul brazenly launch a deadly spear throw against him. Instead, David asks his friend to cover for him, for he is expected at Shaul's feast of the new month, Rosh Chodesh, in Shaul's court. Send me away to Bethlehem, to my father Yishai, and to my family, says David. If your father asks for me, you can tell him that I needed to join my family, who are bringing an animal offering on the occasion of the new month. If you see that this is good in your father's sight, then all is well. But if he becomes angry, then you will know that he expected me in order to do me harm. Two possibilities David does not mention. First, that Shaul may not ask at all about his whereabouts. And second, Shaul may ask but betray no emotion at all when told of David's whereabouts. In such cases, Shaul's attitude would not be revealed at all. Yonatan agrees warmly to help his friend, and David tells him that he will meet him in a certain field where David will be hidden. And Yonatan will come with a bow and quiver of arrows, together with a young boy as his arms bearer. The two friends agree that if Yonatan shoots the arrows and tells the young boy, "Go get the arrows, they are near," it means that his father is not angry at David and it is safe for him to reveal himself to Shaul. But if Yonatan says, "Go get the arrows, they are far," It means that Shaul is indeed angry with David and wishes to do him harm. David beseeches Yonatan to remember their bond of friendship, and Yonatan replies with great emotion. Then Yonatan said to David, "By the Eternal One, the guardian of Israel, I probe my father's mood at this time tomorrow or on the third day, and if his response is favorable, I will send a message to you at once and disclose it to you. But if my father intends to do you harm, may the Almighty do thus to Yonatan, and more, if I do not disclose it to you and send you off to escape unharmed. May the Almighty be with you, as the Almighty was formerly with my father. Nor shall you fail to show me the Almighty's faithfulness while I am alive, nor when I am dead shall you ever discontinue your faithfulness to my house, not even after the Almighty has wiped out every one of your enemies from the face of the earth. Thus has Yonatan covenanted with the house of David forever. And may the Almighty punish the enemies of David. V'hadavar asher dibarnu ani ve'ata hine Hashem beini uvenecha ad olam. As for the promise we made to each other, may the Almighty be witness between you and me forever." David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the festive meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Yonatan arose, and Avner sat down at Shaul's side. But David's place remained vacant. But that first day of the new moon, Shaul said nothing. It is merely coincidental, he thought. He must be ritually impure, tameh, and not yet purified, tahor. But on the second day of the new moon, that David's place was vacant again. So Shaul said to his son Yonatan, "Why didn't the son of Yishai come to the feast yesterday or today?" Yonatan answered Shaul, "David begged leave of me to go to Beit Lechem." He said, "Please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our city, and my brother has summoned me to it. Be so kind as to let me slip away to see my kin. That is why he has not come to the king's table." Shaul flies into a violent rage against Yonatan. "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman," he shouted. "I know that you side with the son of Yishai, to your great shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Yishai lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is a dead man." But Yonatan speaks up and says to his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" At that, Shaul throws his spear at Yonatan to strike him down, and Yonatan realizes that his father is determined to do away with David. Yonatan rises from the table in a rage. He eats no food on the second day of the new moon because he is sorely grieved about David, and because his father has publicly shamed him. Yonatan, explains the sages, is willing to incur both curses and even death for the sake of his great soul friendship with David. It should be emphasized that Yonatan is on an immense spiritual level, not just by virtue of his great courage and his selflessness, including the selflessness of his love for David, but he is also the head of the Sanhedrin, the judges, the Supreme Court, who deals with the most difficult legal questions facing the Jewish people. And he is willing to put his life on the line, not just against the Plishtim, the external enemy, but also stand up even against his own father, the king, where he sees injustice, risking his own life and station in life to do so. And so it is, after Yonatan's confrontation with his father, King Shaul, that in the morning Yonatan goes out into the field for the meeting with David, accompanied by a young boy. Yonatan says to the boy, "Run ahead and find the arrows that I shoot." And as the boy ran, he shoots the arrows past him. And when the boy comes to the place where the arrows shot by Yonatan have fallen, Yonatan calls out to the boy, "Hey, the arrows are beyond you." And Yonatan calls after the boy, "Quick, hurry up, don't stop." So Yonatan's boy gathers the arrows and comes back to his master. The boys suspected nothing. Only Yonatan and David know the arrangement. Yonatan handed the gear to his arms bearer and tells him, "Take these back to the town." When the boy got there, David emerged from his hiding place in the Negev. He flung himself face down on the ground and bowed low 3 times. They hug each other and weep together. David weeps longer than Yonatan. Vayomer Yonatan leDavid, Lech l'shalom, asher nishbanu Shnenu, Anachnu b'shem Hashem, Lemor, Hashem yiyeh beini uvenecha, uven zari uven zarecha, ad olam. Yonatan says to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn to each other in the name of the Almighty. May the Almighty be witness between you and me, and between your offspring and mine forever." In the next episode of the Kings of Israel, we see David fleeing for his life. We witness the cataclysmic events in the town of Nov that occurred in that priestly city, which is currently situated in modern-day Jerusalem.